Hi, it's me again. Look, I know what you're thinking. Another week, another video diary from Georgette. Except this one's a bit different. Like me. I'm a bit different. But you knew that. You see, I love reading all your comments and messages. And I know some of you out there feel the same way I do. And some of you are struggling. So, I thought I'd tell you how I got here. I hope it helps. You see, there's always been something discordant about me. I used to think I was the one instrument out of tune in a very big orchestra. It's been there since the beginning. Let's start with episode 1. I was the unpopular girl. Don't be seen with Georgette. It would damage your reputation. Even speaking to me was dangerous. I couldn't talk to my parents. Mum was usually pumping away at her knitting machine and knocking back gin. Dad was snoring thunderously in front of Gardener's World. The best thing he ever did for me was bring home a telescope. It whined and creaked like an elderly robot, but it worked. I still remember seeing the moon for the first time up close. The detail, the cratered surface, it was magical. School got worse. I was bullied mercilessly. With my frayed trainers and thin legs, they told me I was like a stick insect with clown shoes. And then I met Golden Girl. Remember her because she'll be back later. Her name is Heather Hall. I was tall, willowy, perfect looking. The class used to either dream about me or hang on my every word. I had everything figured out. That easy confidence. She seemed to delight in torturing me. Once, coming out of art class, she pushed me down the stairs. It was dressed up to be an accident. I spent an hour in the nurse's station, bruised and crying. When I was growing up, all I wanted to do was escape. The persecution of school, the disinterest of my parents. I used my telescope to dream. And then I discovered my saviour. He was detached, like me. He was different, like me. I fell in love with a man with pointed ears and upswept eyebrows. Although he wasn't a man at all. He was an alien. His name was Mr. Spock. I found some episodes of Star Trek in a box of DVDs. Yes, with those uniforms, the crew looked like they were having a very serious pyjama party. But I saw through all that. It had substance and soul. It had the iconic, charming Captain Kirk. A man with his own sense of grammar. And of course, a certain magnetic science officer whom I found fascinating. You see, Vulcans suppress their emotions. That was something else I admired. Nothing fazed him. He could absorb the most intense vitriol with barely a cocked eyebrow and a cool stare. Simply put, I wanted to be more like him. The real world was confusing, intimidating. Star Trek was a refuge. On the Enterprise, being different wasn't a crime. It was a place I could understand, a place where I could function. It offered hope to the disillusioned, the disenfranchised, the lost. Where the real world was high-rise flats and chip shops and bills, Star Trek promised the limitless possibilities of existence. I sometimes wondered, when did the world become so unrelatable? To quote a different Star Trek captain, I couldn't engage. My first office job was a bit of a revelation. I had a clean slate. I could start again. I ditched the Technicolor knitwear and migrated to Gothic black. I was the world's first goth Trekkie. The tactic worked. I actually made a friend.
Oh my God, you like Star Trek? That's like so wild.
Thanks to him, I'd find myself in group conversations in nightclubs, like a piece of driftwood caught in the flow. Until I met Jonathan. He had a way of making you feel like you were his best friend. Being lavished with attention was a strange kind of narcotic. When he put his arm around my shoulders, it felt like such a release. After a few months, I'd moved in with him.
I took you out to expensive lunches, shopping trips, weekend breaks. It didn't matter. I was earning a pretty penny as a sales manager. Very pretty. I took the lead on certain duties, financial matters, shared accounts, always asking your permission, because I knew how to play you.
As we went about our lives, he was stockpiling. I didn't know it, but our accounts were being carefully drained from the inside. For months, he'd been making withdrawals, manipulating accounts. He'd fake statements, bills. The truth was there. I just didn't look hard enough. Eventually, he crossed over into embezzlement, submitting fake invoices to his office with the names of genuine suppliers, then giving his own bank details for payment. It didn't take long for him to be found out and charged. Tried to understand. It was like another side of me standing apart. The more it went on, the stronger it got, and the harder it was to think about confessing. It got out of control, I know that now. But there's a sickness inside of me. But I still love you. I still love you. How can you say that? After everything you've done. Lying to me from the beginning. And I was naive enough to believe it. Look at you. Carefully curated tears, plastic mask face. That's what I should have seen. Instead, I was blind. I was drowning in debt. I took a weekend job at one of those vacuous remainder bookstores. Like my mother, I turned to drink. Worked each day in a hangover haze. And as for escapism, my favourite TV show was long forgotten. A cartoonish bit of Americana, bold colours faded to grey. So, when she walked back into my life, Heather Hall, the golden girl, my anger had something to focus on.
Oh my God! It's you! Were you in my class at Chadwick's? Look at you. You've barely aged a day.
She was the latest recruit. That's right. I would be working with my childhood nemesis. She spent the first week looking down her nose at me. Barely spoke. Barely looked up from her work. That was all I needed to know. I took every opportunity to be the co-worker from hell. Treated her as coldly as I could get away with. Made sure every one of her mistakes found their way to the manager. Even invented a few things to land her in it. I still met Neil for a drink occasionally.
Wow, Georgie. You're like heavy drinking and nihilistic attitude has made you really interesting.
When I first spotted Heather in the nightclub, I was already in an alcoholic haze. She was in the company of a very animated, rather brutish-looking boyfriend, who no doubt worshipped her. I had to do something. Humiliate her. Maybe worse. I didn't mention it to Neil. He'd have only tried to stop me. She slipped away from Neanderthal, stumbled across the bar towards the toilets. She was stood at the top of the stairs, with her back to me, oblivious. It was like an invitation. I left the bar, told Neil I'd be back. It would be so easy. People were occupied, the bar was busy. It was a CCTV blind spot. I would just slip by and bump into her as I walked past, then disappear. I wouldn't even watch her go down. I imagined her arms pinwheeling. I strode forward into the crush. That soulless music piped through the walls, rhythmic, driving me on. There, I was close enough. It was time. But she was turning. She would see me. I let her turn, let her see me. She couldn't stop me now, now! She looked at me with exhausted eyes. I saw misery there, tears. Something shifted in me. Something cried out. It all happened at once. The boyfriend appeared out of nowhere, seized her arm. She went weak with pain. There were dozens of people around, but they just went about their business, pretended they didn't notice. Where I'd seen her fear, they just didn't even bother looking. Heather was being dragged out of the club. Security, nowhere to be seen. So I followed them. The street outside was empty. I listened hard, heard his voice down the side alley, spouting accusations. Ugly man, ugly words. One side of Heather's face was visibly swollen. I strode towards them without hesitation, told her to come with me. He was in my face, sweating, wild eyes told me it had fuck all to do with me. I got in between them. He took his first swipe. It seemed reflexive, like he was used to it. But I was ready for him, kicked him as hard as I could, sent him staggering, and then we ran. Left him gasping. Ran in silence, or silent understanding. Golden Girl and the world's first goth Trekkie. After that, things changed between Heather and I. I recognised the ugliness inside of me. Jonathan had brought it to life, but I'd nurtured it, allowed it to grow. Anger has to subside eventually, and when it does, you start to talk. I learned a lot about Heather Hall. I learnt about the abuse she suffered at the hands of her own father in her teenage years. He was the reason she spent hours perfecting her makeup, her hair, her clothing. He was the reason she became the most nastiest, elitist girl in school. And yet, she felt like an outsider. She just wanted to fit in. The capable, the popular Heather Hall was in fact like me. Everyone can feel the way I did, even those who appear to have mastered life. Everyone can feel different, isolated, apart, not understanding the world, seeking refuge. It was so obvious, it was crushing. And yet, I'd always turned away from the truth. Maybe there was an elitist in me too. I wasn't like the others, and so that made me special. Maybe I was afraid of being what I considered ordinary. I should have listened to a certain green-blooded Vulcan. Mr. Spock has a saying, infinite diversity in infinite combinations. It's the differences that make us stronger. I didn't have to fit in to survive. Spock was the most popular character on the show. And you know why? Because we can all feel like aliens sometimes. And you know what? Being an alien can be a good thing. You don't take things for granted. You question. You look objectively. I'd been the only one to protect Heather that night. Because I'd seen something in her eyes. Something everyone else had turned away from. Like an alien, I looked from the outside in. So, here we are. And from now on, I'm going to finish what I started with Heather that night. I'm going to reach out, look outward, not in. Then, maybe I can finally do one thing. Engage.